All right, so here I am at one of my favorite waterfall playgrounds. I thought I'd take a moment in the parking lot to teach you guys how to run waterfalls. One of the questions I get a lot is, why do I run waterfalls? The honest answer is waterfalls are an entirely new dimension of kayaking. And the experience of flow when you kayak over a waterfall is unique to only waterfalls. There's a moment where as you go off the lip, it seems like the whole world opens up and you feel this time distortion as the flow kicks in. As you free fall, you can watch the little droplets of water that you joined floating around your head, free of space and time. It's such a cool feeling. And then there's this impact that brings you back to reality. And you paddle away, hopefully unscathed and extra stoked. It's important to know if you're looking at stepping up to waterfalls that even the smallest waterfalls can hurt you. One of the waterfalls that hurt me the most was the easiest 20-footer in the whole state of Colorado, South Mineral Creek. And all I did was goof, and I was doing a late stomp, and I was going to go down to 45 degrees and puts you in a bad position, and the landing went straight up my spine because I hadn't finished the move yet. My ears were ringing, my legs went numb, my back was crushed. I had no idea how bad it was until later. So when you start looking at running bigger and bigger waterfalls, make sure that you practice the techniques on smaller, less consequential drops and work your way up gradually. And don't get a false sense of confidence. Don't think, oh, well, I did that one fine, so the next one of the same height will be the same. Waterfalls are different, and they require different skill sets. One of my favorite things about this playground where I am right now, I'm at Rock Island in Tennessee, is that you have a 20-foot waterfall playground with 10 different lines at least you can run on these waterfalls at the right flows. And that means there's tons of stuff that you can do to practice handling the lips. And the lip can be really short and steep or pretty long and curved. And so the lip is the transition to vertical that you have on the waterfall. The true lip of the waterfall is where the green water actually breaks free into falling water. That line where the water breaks free is the true lip of the waterfall. The curtain is the part of the free-falling water that falls vertically from the waterfall. When we measure waterfall height, we measure from the true lip where the water breaks free to the base of the waterfall. The base of the waterfall is called the plunge pool, and below it, hopefully, you have a nice boil where the water comes back to the surface after landing really deep. So in deciding to run a waterfall or not, you're making sure that the landing is free of rocks, that there's water leaving the hole below the waterfall so that you know you're not just going to get stuck behind the curtain or under the falls or in some weird pocket. And you want to make sure that safety can get to you at the bottom of the waterfall and that you can get out from the bottom of the waterfall. So is it accessible? Are the bottom and tops of the waterfall accessible? Or if you run it, are you going to be stuck in a gorge having to run a bunch of other things when you might be injured? So in summary, instead of just looking at things like height when deciding to run a waterfall or not, you also have to look at depth, outflow, and accessibility. So how do waterfalls form anyway? Waterfalls form when you have a hard, resistant layer of rock that's layered on top of a softer, more easily eroded layer of rock. And as that softer rock erodes away, the harder rock stays in place, and you end up with a waterfall. Waterfalls form on different kinds of rock. Igneous rock makes nice smooth slides and really cool curving features with nice deep pools at the bottom. But other types of rock form waterfalls too. Here in the southeast, we have a whole lot of sandstone and limestone rock that stacks to make these waterfalls. The more you know about the geology of the river you're on, the more you can predict about a waterfall. Now the thing about waterfalls is that hard resistant layer that forms the lip oftentimes breaks off in chunks. And when it breaks off in chunks, it lands at the bottom of the waterfall. So learning to scout appropriately and predict where those rocks have landed by looking at the shape of the lip and looking at the boils of the water below tells you whether or not the drop is safe. All right, so here we are, we're at Rock Island, and there's a bunch of little waterfalls pouring down. Well, the cool thing about this spot is I can show you on a micro scale what happens on bigger waterfalls. So the way you know it's deep on a bigger waterfall is by looking at the bottom, looking at the aeration below the waterfall. And if you're looking at this aeration, you can see it's pretty soft. Soft aeration means deep water. Deep water means you can probably run it. Harder aeration means shallower water, where splashy a lot of times means there's a rock. But typically when we're looking to run a waterfall, what we're looking for is actually a nice boil to land on. And the reason for that is where you see a boil, that's water coming up from deep underneath all the other water. That water's been held down and it's finally getting a chance to surface.
So what you're looking for on a waterfall you're going to run is a nice, big, soft boil, evenly leaving a big green tongue like this one. That lets you know the water is leaving the waterfall uninterrupted.
So here's a perfect example. I have a rock, and we get to move the rock to change the boil. This boil indicates the deeper spots where the water is able to surface. So you see the water coming down. When it resurfaces, it goes underwater, and when it resurfaces, it comes up as these boils. Now, those boils can mean a couple of things. It can mean that the water is getting shallower, or it can mean that that water is good to go. So if I move the rock to one side of the waterfall, you'll notice there's a more defined boil over here. So this is nice and deep, but this is going to be shallower. I can move the rock right here, and what you'll notice is there's going to be more of a boil right here. To make it more defined there, the water is having to exit next to the rock. So this water is having to rise up around that rock. At the same time, anytime a waterfall gets shallow really quickly, you're going to see irregularly defined boils. The reason that's important is because where that deep water can surface is where it's deep. So that's what you're looking for when you're scouting waterfalls.
So when you're trying to decide whether or not it's deep, you're looking for evenly flowing, soft boils. So this river right side looks pretty good. It's pretty soft, it's evenly flowing away from the waterfall. It's okay if there's boils that are pronounced or larger than others, especially if the flow going off the lip is different. Boils will naturally respond to that. A bigger boil is going to form below a bigger flow. Where this big boil forms, though, it's forming because the water is being forced upward really, really abruptly by the rock. You know this because where the boil is surfacing doesn't match the natural flow of the water, and because the curtain is pretty even all the way across. There's not a bigger portion of water causing this boil over the others. The boils are very irregular shaped. There's a weird flattening right below it. There's a little wave forming below it. It looks pretty splashy. If this were an actual big waterfall, you'd see a lot of splashing and surging water. So in this case, the right side looks deeper than the left side, which probably means that's a better place to run the waterfall. But keep in mind that this is in terms of, are there rocks at the bottom? In terms of hydraulics, a nice even hydraulic that looks pretty benign could be more dangerous in the case of a low-head dam, for example. So here's an example of a frequently run waterfall. It looks a lot like the miniature version we were just looking at. The right side is definitely deep and has a nice even outflow away from the waterfall, and the left side has a boil. But in this case, the boil on the left side is caused by deeper flow going off the curtain. The right side, even though it's safe to run, as water levels rise, forms a pretty nasty hole, and so the outflow is on the river left side. So when running this waterfall, the easiest way to run it is often to the left.
Anytime you're going to run a waterfall, one thing that needs to be on your mind is ending up behind the waterfall. Anytime you end up behind the curtain, it's not usually a pleasant place to be. Sometimes it's big and open and you can paddle out of it, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's closed off by rocks on both sides that have fallen in from the lip. So it's important, whatever waterfall you're running, that you have a solid understanding and a safety setup that's ready for what happens behind that waterfall. It could be a big room like this one because the rock is eroded away from the boil, or it could be splashing against the rocks that have fallen in before, so the back of the waterfall may land on those rocks. If that's the case, when you resurf behind them, you might not have any air pockets to deal with. So it's important anytime you're running a waterfall that you have a safety plan for what happens should you end up behind the waterfall, behind the curtain. Because it is a real possibility when you're running waterfalls.
For free fall technique, check out part 2.
I hope that you've enjoyed it and learned a lot. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe, pass it around and share my channel. I'm growing this and I am making lots new videos. Tell me what you want to learn and tell me what you think of this one in the comments below. I'll see you on the river.